From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello and welcome back. Our guest today is the Commander-in-Chief of the Federalist, Ben Domenech. And on that note, we shall go to our issue 1, which is issue 1, letter bombs.
Acts or threats of political violence of any kind have no place in the United States of America.
President Trump this week condemned those responsible for mailing explosive devices to senior Democrats and the CNN News Network. Those targeted included former President Barack Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. But while Trump pledged to find and prosecute the culprit or culprits, some Democrats say that the president's words don't go far enough. And on Thursday, Trump asserted that the media, as well as politicians, bear culpability in fostering a growing culture of political violence.
And of course, the Department of Justice have now indicted a gentleman from Florida, Cesar Sayok, in relation to those bombings. But of course, we've also had the terrible incident this weekend, which we should note first, of an attack on innocent worshippers at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. And so on that basis, I want to ask Pat, the hate we see in our country, who is to blame for the hate?
Well, hate's a very common human condition and human failing. We're talking about murderous hatred, where you go into a synagogue and murder people. Who's responsible for that? The individual himself who perpetrates this kind of atrocity. Let me talk about the Trump thing, though, the mail bomber. This could turn out to be something different, Tom. It all depends on whether any of these devices could actually explode. The security people say some of the ones they've seen simply weren't actual bombs. They were built like bombs. And if it couldn't explode, they couldn't explode, then I think the individual who's been arrested, who's a criminal with a horrible record and who has a Trump van, actually, that could be overtaken this week as an issue by the horror that was perpetrated in Pittsburgh, which is a massacre right along lines of Dillon Route down there in that church down there in Charleston.
Eleanor.
Well, there are a lot of forces at play to contribute. What we sense in this country is sort of hate getting out of control. The president has said the right things after the attack in Pittsburgh, but he's got another dozen rallies before the midterm. And in the White House, in the East Room on Friday, speaking to a group of young black conservatives, he also said the right things initially, and then stood there as they chanted, "CNN sucks, lock her up," about Hillary Clinton. And then, of course, there's the old favorite of George Soros. George Soros is a Holocaust survivor. He's Jewish. You don't vilify people at these rallies. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. She came close to being the first woman president. This language has no place in our political dialogue. So I think this president does bear some responsibility for the lid being taken off on a lot of hateful expressions in this country.
Ben, Trump blame.
I think that the question of Trump blame here is a frame that is a little irresponsible for the media to embrace. What we've seen over the past decade in America is the increase of these attacks on places of worship. You have Emanuel AME in Charleston, as Pat mentioned. You have Overland Park, the Jewish Community Center. You have the Texas church, the First Baptist Church in Texas. You have this horrible attack in Pittsburgh against a Tree of Life synagogue. What we're seeing here are attacks on the last remaining strong institutions that bind communities together in a way of faith and love. And I don't think that's accidental. I think that this is a climate of hate that is increasing in America toward these various last institutions that still provide a unifying force within community. And for these psychotic individuals, they view that community with hate. They are, so often they tend to have these similar profiles of being loners who attack out groups. In this case, what we know about the shooter in Pittsburgh indicates that he's someone who has a long history of anti-Semitism, of hatred directed towards Jews in America. And I think that that form of hatred tends to seek out strong communities and those who are bound together by belief.
Clarence, is there anything we can do in a policy sense, or we should do?
I knew you were going to move toward that policy thing. Of course, that's naturally what always happens after a tragedy like this. Whose fault is it? Obviously, number one, it's the shooter and or would-be bomber. But why? What motivated them? Ben is hitting on something that is, I'm sure we're going to hear more discussion about. I thought the day the Florida man was busted as a suspect in these mail bombings, or would-be mail bombings, that I hope we don't see a copycat violence right behind it. Now what happens is here the next day we see this shooting in Pittsburgh. And that's something that naturally leads to a discussion about mental health, which is usually the default position that the NRA goes to right away. We need to work on mental health, not trying to control the guns. I think we got to work on both, and that debate continues.
Well, there's an element of mental illness here, yes, but America doesn't have more mentally ill people than other countries. We are unique when it comes to gun violence, and apparently the shooter in Pittsburgh had an assault weapon, and the president is saying, well, it could have been avoided if somebody was at the entrance with a gun. You can't have somebody at every entrance, at every synagogue and every church with a gun, which is unlikely to repel an assault weapon anyway. The president has also called for the reimposition of the death penalty. Like somehow if we can execute these people immediately, that's going to make it better. The death penalty has had no deterrent effect, and it is basically opposed. The opposition to the death penalty is worldwide.
Let me talk about the hate thing. Look, it is also true that Donald Trump is a victim of hate. Hillary Rodham Clinton, during the campaign, said his supporters are racist, sexist, homophobes, xenophobes, all the rest of it. We hear them called fascists. We hear them called Nazis. We hear them called anti-Semites. It is common in the parlance. It was not there in the Goldwater days, I'll tell you that. It was a rarity to ever hear the word
Goldwater
fascist.
was never called a racist?
Now it's common. Now it's commonplace, and it's aimed at
Ben, let's let Ben in.
But we have to keep in mind this very week, the New York Times ran a series of fan fictions, including one in which the president is assassinated with the help of Secret Service members.
And the Secret Service condemned that strongly.
That's in the New York Times. That's not on some random internet site. The coarsening of rhetoric is not just on one side.
Excuse me,
criticism is just
the president has the biggest bully pulpit. He has a megaphone.
President Obama went out this week and criticized President Trump.
Hours after they were arresting the bomber in Florida, the president was tweeting, oh, this bomb stuff with bomb in quotes. It's slowing the momentum for the Republicans in the midterm. It's all about him. Now, he's the victim. He's the one who's put up with more bullying than anybody else. He leads rallies where they chant, lock her up.
Let me talk about you. You and your folks over there are going to use the last week of this campaign to say exactly what you're saying. Trump's responsible. He agitates people. He's behind the violence. He's a causal factor in that crazy guy down there in Florida who is a nutcase.
I'll tomahawk you right back. I'll tomahawk you right back. Me and my ilk, me and my ilk are not going to focus on Trump these last days. No, we're going to focus on how he's lying about
you're not showing love.
About covering health care. How he's throwing out tax cuts for the middle class.
Why don't you say something nice about it?
All right, we do have two other panelists.
I want one more sentence. He's throwing out tax cuts for the middle class like he threw out towels in Puerto Rico. It's a complete myth. He is lying his way to this.
It's lovely.
All right, Clarence.
Are we shifting to the campaign now? Because
well, you can go where you wish to go.
If you don't mind me just making one little point. I'm very amused by how the Republicans now have turned around to loving pre-existing conditions. Which is one of the provisions of Obamacare, which they hate, but the voters have always liked certain provisions of it, and we ought to all be working together to try to improve health care coverage. But instead, of course, especially at election time, we have this massive fight going on, in which President Trump now lies. He says the Democrats are against Medicare and Republicans are trying to say.
Let me go to Ben and then you can come in, Pat.
I think the thing to understand here is that everyone has been radicalized.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The fact is, when you start talking about guns the way that you do, Eleanor, you're talking about the most popular rifle in America, the AR-15. Okay, you're not going to be able to take those away unless you do it by force and melt them down. And that's something that I think we need to understand. That, you know, frankly, if the conversation
well, background
turns,
checks. You're talking about
That
confiscation.
is
Let Ben finish.
regulation.
Let Ben finish. Let Ben finish. Let Ben finish.
Ben, that's not the issue, and you know it.
But the issue is, if you want to have a conversation about that running up into this last week of the midterm elections, I think the NRA is happy to have that conversation because it radicalizes
I
everything.
think
Quickly, Pat.
women in suburban districts
All
will
right,
also
let's-
be happy to have
Pat's
that
done.
conversation.
Look, I was with Richard Nixon in the last days of Watergate, one of the worst beatings I've ever seen of a president. That was nothing. What he got over his career was nothing compared to what I've seen happen to Donald Trump. Now, maybe he deserved some of it, but the hatred and the venom, I mean, on this set, we've been hearing him called liar any number of times.
But
we
that's
didn't use,
But Will Smith
we
in my
didn't
face.
use
That's a
terms
fact.
like that.
I do it
in
out of
the-
love,
in-
Pat. I do it out of love because when I see if someone violating any of the 10 Commandments, and I think Trump is up to about 7 or 8 of them so far.
Okay, well then,
I want to try to help him.
Clarence, let's get it on then. If you want to have the fight, that's what's going on in politics, and we're delighted to have it.
I've been
Eleanor,
doing it for 30
would you
years.
say, though, to Ben's point, that, you know, why is one of the nation's foremost publications, the New York Times, doing this? That does not help, does it?
Doing what?
Putting these...
I wasn't even aware of that. I didn't
It's a
read that.
fiction piece.
Okay,
And
all
I'm a
right.
subscriber. I somehow missed this, but
I
thank you for
missed
telling
that
me
too.
about it.
Well, maybe it's selective perception. Maybe that's part of the
it's
problem.
no, it's just the fact that newspaper's a big medium and covers a lot of stuff.
Well, but
Who
let me
knows
that
how
was
much-
talked
Ben,
about,
but let me-
widely
let me
talked
just
about.
let me just point out, I think that I certainly agree that the president has coarsened the conversation when it comes to things. He's very blunt and he speaks in those blunt terms. But I also want to say I think that coarsening has now infected the entirety of our political discourse.
Yeah,
and
but
that you
he's at
can't
the top.
But
So he
he's
sets
not. But he's
the
not
tone.
determining what the New York
The
Times
fish
runs.
rots from the head.
But
Remember
if you're a
that.
Trump supporter
The
and you
truth
see
is,
someone
the truth
tweeting
is,
about that,
Americans don't like each other. They're deeply divided and embittered between the Hillary Clinton folks and the Trump folks, and it was astonishing that Trump won. But this is what we're going through with our politics now. And look, it's not going to be cleared up quickly.
I don't
It's because
think-
we're divided on what we believe and think and admire.
I don't
and
think
respect.
every day. I don't think every day people hate
multiple
each
writers-
other. I don't think every day people hate
they
each
do.
other.
Multiple
Elections
writers
are
who
very
worked for
close.
me had responses for death threats to simply coming out in support of Brett Kavanaugh. Women who write for me who had to
Yes.
contact local police, who got police guards. I've had
right.
that same thing happen to me. This is not simply something that is. This is different.
No,
this is
there
different
has
than what
been
we've
an
had.
escalation among the trolls.
Enemies
And
of the
after
people.
After this fellow was busted in Florida, I said, he sounds like one of my writers, or one of my
Yes, one of the people
co-respondents
we-
out there,
Okay.
Will, right? Luis Gutierrez thinks that he definitely contacted him,
Yeah.
the congressman who is kind of a leader on immigration issues. Now, this is the kind of thing that there's definitely a coarsening out there. This is not new. Folks said the same thing about the McLaughlin Group 20 years ago. Now people praise us for getting along here.
Yeah.
for a half
Coming
hour.
from the Oval Office after there are legitimate pipe bomb threats. Pat's saying, oh, they were designed not to go off. I heard that the
All right.
director of the FBI
All right,
say
We're
they
gonna
are
move on.
not a hoax.
You're
not
right.
hoax.
He said it's not a hoax, but no,
We're gonna move on.
no provable bomb has been found and shown to us that is an explosive.
It's still
Now,
an
it may
All right.
be.
terrorism.
All right,
It was
all right, all right, all right.
terrorism.
When we
If it's
come
a
back,
bomb, it was terrorism.
when we come
That's
back,
right.
the caravan and a potpourri, not potpourri, of other intellectual delicacies. We will see you in a moment.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. Is your company trying to provide health and retirement benefits to workers across the country? The ERISA Industry Committee beats back taxes, mandates, and compliance burdens that make it harder for companies to provide employee benefits. Learn how Eric supports large employers at Eric.org.
When I was a freshman in college, I lost my brother Brian to suicide. Brian had been a very successful college student himself who was president of an a cappella group, sports editor of a newspaper, 3.8 GPA at an Ivy League university. Brian eventually went and sought help in his senior year. The hopelessness and the helplessness that accompanies depression had gotten to him, and had gotten to him so strong that just about a year later, in my freshman year of college, Brian died by suicide.
Issue 2, the caravan.
We cannot let people come into our country illegally. Just can't do it. Can't do it. You don't have borders, you don't have a country.
Pledging to prevent around 4,000 to 5,000 migrants from entering the United States, President Trump this week warned that he would consider deploying the U.S. military. The caravan of migrants is currently transiting Mexico in an effort to reach U.S. soil and request asylum. President Trump and congressional Republicans say that the caravan evidences the continuing inadequacy of U.S. immigration laws. Democrats disagree. They are calling for understanding and respect.
Eleanor, doesn't the president have a point when he says a nation cannot exist without the enforcement of borders?
We have enforcement of borders, and these people are coming. They have every right under our laws and under U.S. international laws to present themselves at the border legally and ask for asylum. There was another caravan like this in April of this year. By the time they got to the border, they're walking 1,000 miles. Many of them fall away. They're sick. They have children. These are not Middle Eastern terrorists, as the president has suggested. And to say that you're going to send the military to the border, first of all, they're not even, whenever they arrive, it will be months from now. This is about the midterms. He is trying to rev up the grievances among the people who supported him, to let them know that he's still on this case. Even though that wall has not been built, he's still on the case. He is abusing national security as an excuse to do a very political act.
Look, clearly he is raising the issue of immigration, which is a powerful issue for Republicans. It's the most powerful issue in the Western world. The idea of third world peoples coming across the Mediterranean, coming across the Rio Grande, changing the character of countries and things. This has all of Europe up in virtual arms. It's creating new parties. It drove Trump as president of the United States because of it. Is he making political hay out of it? He is, and he should, because it's a graphic example, and that's why the TV cameras are down there.
He's going beyond hay, though. He's distorting what the caravan really is in order to make it an issue of, say, if you are opposed to stopping the caravan or whatever. It really doesn't say what action ought to be done with the caravan. But if you aren't upset about this caravan heading this away, then you must want open borders. And that message is getting out there to his base. I see it in my reader mail. But the fact is that yeah, we are all in favor of borders and protecting our borders. The caravan itself was dissipated back in April.
In April,
and it's dissipating
three
now. It's dissipating now.
Gained
Yeah, and the fact is, you want to know what happens when they get to the border? Look at Tijuana now. Just go together. You see people camping out there who've been camping out there for weeks already.
How often are you going to Tijuana?
Just waiting to get processed in.
What are you doing in Tijuana?
I'll be happy to discuss their drug problem sometime, because that's why I was down there covering it. But anyway, go ahead.
The thing that I think, a couple of things. First off, this is he is making hay out of it. He's making hay in response to the fact that so many Democrats got out over their skis earlier this year with this whole abolish ICE movement, which is something that's very animating for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And people like Kristen Gillibrand came in and embraced it before realizing that the polling on it, even in their own party, isn't that good. So that's partially the calculation he's making. But as part of the broader conversation here, we need to have a conversation about the level of cartel control along the border. They have locked down that border on their side, and they decide who comes and who goes in terms of getting through. You have to pay them to get past. If you don't pay them, then they will murder you. And it's one of these situations where you have to exchange, the ability to be a drug mule for them in some instances.
Is that new, Ben?
They're all, no. It's a much higher level problem now than it has been historically.
I mean, it's been no relation to the actual traffic of people.
No, it has huge relation to traffic. It is absolutely. This is partially the way that the cartels have made up the difference in their funding since the U.S.
What do you want to do about it?
Well, I think that we have to have a conversation about nation building closer to home.
Okay.
The simple fact is we've spent billions of dollars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we actually have to have a Mexican government that functions.
Well, Mexico is, as we speak, has stopped or slowed down the caravan. But we should talk to the Mexicans and tell them, look, don't let these caravans come into our country across your country 1,000 miles. When they come into your country, you give them asylum if you want to give them asylum, or you turn them back. We're going to renegotiate NAFTA another time.
The president, the president is boasting about what a good relationship he has with Mexico.
Sure,
the bigger problem is in Central America and those three countries, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, where we were giving more foreign aid and building up programs there to keep people from coming out. The president dismantled everything Obama put in place and is threatening them with withdrawing more foreign aid. Those people are going to keep coming because they are desperate.
I disagree with your
ask yourself if you have a small child, you're going to walk across the desert for thousands of miles. You only do that if you're really desperate. And these women and the children and the men too should be treated
were the
with
deadliest in their
respect.
history. You had the murders of almost 200 politicians who were running for local office. Anyone who stood up to the cartels, they would kill you, and they killed many of them in broad daylight on camera.
Do we need to do what we did with Colombia?
That has nothing to do with the
absolutely.
caravan.
The decay of Mexican politics and the decay of their ability to control their own government as opposed to having it run effectively by the cartels is the biggest difference in any of these caravans getting
bring Clarence in and then we're going to pass.
If I can wedge in real quick here. Number one, this is not new. You're right. Certain aspects of it are more severe than they used to be. But the Mexican government is in very much control compared to the Honduran government right now, and the corruption in that Central American triangle. President Trump is ignoring that when he talks about, when he demagogues this caravan and all that. But that's the source of, these are just people looking for help. They're trying to get away. They are refugees.
Wait a minute.
And they are protected by international law, and he's making a campaign issue out of it.
They got no international right to come to the United States of America. And
They
if the
have
young
good rights
men,
as refugees,
if the young men of
You don't like them,
Honduras,
but they do.
if the young men of Honduras don't like their government, why don't they overthrow it the way we overthrew the British?
That's the problem. They're not fighting among themselves right now. But
why don't they fight?
We can do more to
maybe you should help them overthrow the government.
We can do more to provide incentives for good government in Central America.
Good government in Central America is a contradiction in terms.
Money this president wants to spend on the wall would be better spent helping those countries.
Ben, to go to your cartel point, should we be doing? Should we be doing what we did in Colombia?
I think we
should.
Big
program.
I think that the fact of the matter is that
and it worked in Colombia.
we have to get a lockdown on these issues. The level of control that these cartels exercise along the border should not be tolerated, and a wall cannot prevent them from having that level.
What you're talking about is there's going to be U.S. troops one of these days, just like there's naval ships in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, but U.S. troops are not
in Mexico.
They can't engage in law enforcement. There are
You
laws
wait till
against that as
well.
well.
If they go into Mexico, they can engage.
And they're also not going to be armed.
Posse Comitatus Act, Pat.
Look, are you kidding? You don't know what's coming?
It's not a military problem.
The cartel.
It's a handful of women and children.
All right. Let me make an observation. Posse Comitatus, as our esteemed fellow McLaughlin Seth will surely tell us at some future point, is open to interpretation by the executive and the judiciary.
All laws are open to interpretation. Doesn't mean they aren't laws.
All right. But let me ask another question here. How functionally do we expect this will play out in the midterms?
I think that
the issue itself.
It's clearly an issue, but I do believe what we talked about earlier, which is the so-called bomber and that character and what this horror that took place in Pittsburgh, and the attacks on Trump for his language and
What will be the result?
I think that the result will be the caravan will be downplayed to some degree. The Republicans will try to elevate it, and they will do so to some degree, but not as much as they would have.
I agree with that. It's like number 6 or 7 on the list of what people are concerned about. And the wonderful clip with Martha McSally, the Senate candidate in Arizona, she's being asked about how she's promoting herself as a big advocate to help people to preserve the right for insurance.
Preconditions?
No, pre-existing conditions. She's presenting herself as a leader in the fight to retain Obamacare when it comes to pre-existing conditions, when she voted against it some 70 times. And the reporter asks her about this repeatedly. She says, can't we talk about something else? What about the caravan? Let's talk about the caravan. It's clearly a diversion.
There's the caravan is one of any number of issues, but what we actually see right now is an intense level of interest in these midterms on both sides. Prior to the Kavanaugh incident, we did not see that. Now we do see it, and it's leading, frankly, to a situation where Democrats running for re-election in red states are feeling the brunt of it. Just this week, we saw a number of different prognosticators move the Missouri Senate race, where Claire McCaskill is running for re-election, from a toss-up to lean Republican. We see a number of these.
New Jersey.
We see a potential fight in New Jersey. I do think that'll end up still being blue, but I think it's one of these situations where you're going to see a high level of output no matter what the issue is that is the motivating factor in all of these districts.
Clarence.
Yeah, most voters have made up their minds by now. The issue is turnout and what excites people enough to actually get out and vote. And here we see that it's a contest of fears. What are you more afraid of? People coming in over the border, taking over our culture, or losing your pre-existing condition coverage? I mean, these are real issues to people, and it remains to be seen which is going to prevail in the end. But that's where the caravan is going to be.
You could have, you know,
Very quickly,
all about guns. You got to have the whole guns issue again coming up this week.
Okay, all right. Well, we will have a very special midterm McLaughlin Group specifically focusing on the result there on November 10th. But anyway, we'll be right back with predictions.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. With gridlock in Washington, states are stepping in to mandate paid sick and family leave policies, creating a compliance nightmare for companies with a nationwide workforce. The ERISA Industry Committee is fighting back. Learn how we can help your company at Eric.org.
Predictions, Pat.
Well, as I told you a while ago, this Mr. Bolsonaro down in Brazil,
Yeah.
he's going to take this presidency coming on this weekend, and someone's described him, said, Bolsonaro's Brazil compared to will make Trump's America look like Mr. Rogers' neighborhood.
All right, Eleanor.
Democrats will capture a number of governorships in November, including the big ones, Florida, Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois. And Nancy Pelosi will be the next Speaker in the House.
Okay, Ben.
Chuck Grassley referred Michael Avenatti and his client Julie Swetnick to the Justice Department this week in a criminal referral for investigation into whether they lied to the Senate Judiciary Committee about Brett Kavanaugh. Avenatti will lean into this and use it to further his 2020 presidential hopes, which are real.
Okay, Clarence.
I predict a last hurrah campaign for Joe Biden, who will run for president with the promise that he'll only serve one term to clean up the mess left behind by who's our current president? Oh yeah, Donald Trump.
Okay, all right. I predict the stock market will stabilize in the near future. The fundamentals of the economy are strong, and the China issue is factored in, I think. And that's based on my dad, who used to work in finance. And here's a random fact. 78 years ago today, the overconfident Italian fascist leader, Benito Mussolini, invaded Greece. But the Greeks were not cowed. Using terrain as an ally, the under-equipped Greek army held out for months, like the Finns against the Soviets, until in 1941, Hitler threw his military weight against the Greek forces in support of his Italian ally. Mussolini won the day, but his military inadequacies were laid bare. Mussolini's fate would be sealed in April 1945, when Italian partisans captured and summarily executed him. Did you know about that, Pat?
Sure, they hung him in a gas station, and what kind of gas station was it?
Diesel. All right, bye-bye.
BP.
BP.